Hello and welcome to Homicide Hobbies. I'm Andy,
And I'm Claire.
and we're here to talk about some of the disturbing things that go on in the world, past and present. We feel like not knowing doesn't mean the crazy doesn't exist.
So we're going to scar you with the knowing.
Enjoy. All right, what do you got for me today, Claire?
So today we're headed to the place that is home to the oldest library, founded in 1653.
Connecticut?
Nope. And where the Industrial Revolution kicked off. Peaky Blinders was filmed there.
What?
Thought you watched that show.
I don't know where it was filmed. I thought it was, but it takes place in London.
I didn't say we were in the United States.
Look at you getting me back. You are a stinker.
So we're headed to Manchester, England.
Oh.
So today we're going to talk about a murderous couple, Ian Brady and Myra Hindley. Now, we're going to start off in January 1961. Myra's 18, Ian's 24. They'd be working at the Millwards Merchandising. Now, Myra is a typist and Ian is a clerk. Myra would get all swoony over just looking at Ian and write about him in her diary, even though they hadn't spoken. Now, she would keep writing about him in her diary until the day when their first words would be spoken to each other, which was several months later at the end of July, which only fuels her diary entries about Ian. They wouldn't go on their first date until December to see a movie, which talk about moving slow.
I don't know that I'd be that patient. But then again, Jason and I got married after,
well, you figure from the time she first saw him in January to they don't speak until July.
Yeah.
But they wouldn't go on their first date until December to go to the movies.
All right.
They have a great time, and it would start a regular thing of them going to see the movies together until their PG movies turn to they start going to see X-rated movies together.
No, that escalated quickly.
Not really, but...
Well, from the time they actually started going to the movies to being inappropriate, yeah, sure did.
Then they go from their X-rated movies to heading back to Myra's house for some wine. Now, at work, they would spend their lunches together, read to each other about Nazis and other shit that people do to each other, like just a morbid curiosity of things.
Mm-hmm.
But Myra also started checking out books about crimes and torture. Then she would get the idea to bleach her hair blonde and start wearing red lipstick to look like the ideal Aryan specimen from all their Nazi readings.
All right.
She also starts wearing different kinds of clothing, high boots, short skirts, leather jackets. I think she watched too many of those X-rated movies, personally.
Sounds like it.
But Myra would write to one of her friends and tell her she was a little worried about Ian because he had drugged her and pretty sure he took advantage of her. But she was so obsessed with him. A few months later, she'd talk to that friend and be like, yeah, can you destroy that letter for me? Which the friend would do, but it's still one of those real weird if you think your significant other is drugging you. Well, Ian and Myra would run into a feller named George Clitheroe, who was the president of a rifle club, and they began taking trips to the range and doing target practice, and George would be all, yeah, I'll help you find a .22 rifle to buy, so you can do your practicing, but you can't join my rifle club, this is to Myra, because you're not only a real bad shot, but you have a wicked temper, so you don't really fit the people I like to have in my shooting club. She'd get all upset and then decide to go out and buy a 45 and a 38 from other club members. That'll teach him.
Yeah, sure will.
I just thought it was funny because how about that awkward? So not only are you a horrible shot, but you were really hot-tempered. I prefer you not come out shooting with us.
I mean, it's fair.
But I guess props to you for being honest. But one of the couple's other hobbies would be photography, where Ian would take pictures of Myra and her dog and, I wrote this in my notes wrong because to say he would take pictures of Myra and her dog to a more erotic nature as he would take erotic pictures of Myra, and then when they were in the nature setting with the dog, there were pictures of Myra and the dog. Yeah. I don't know that there were any erotic pictures, including the dog.
Yeah, as you started to say that, I made a face of,
This is an
I don't.
interesting way of
I
letting
really
me
don't
know that she was
believe.
into bestiality, Claire.
I really don't believe there was anything involved with fucking the dog.
I would hope not. Poor dog.
But they would take turns taking pictures of each other on the pervy side. And Myra was definitely no longer a shy young lady or well mannered. She was definitely a
Yeah.
not a shy, quiet lady. It's like she's experienced the dick and has gone full fledged that direction with the short skirts, the high boots, the red lipstick, the bleach blonde hair. Like she's really going full tilt into this one, and she really likes Ian. Not so much that she'd fuck the dog, just so we're clear. That was a misspeak.
You don't know.
I can only hope. But so when I say that they would go to the movies and then come back at Myra's house, obviously she's young. She's not on her own. It's not her house. She lives with her grandmother. Now, Myra's dad is an alcoholic that liked to be violent to his wife and his children. Now, when they were growing up, they lived in a small place, and usually Myra had to sleep in a small bed next to her parents. But when her younger sister was born, they needed some space. So she got the boot and went to go live with her grandmother when she's 5, which I also feel like maybe was also the whole so she stops getting smacked and you can't throw the baby out because mom and baby kind of need each other.
Right.
But so she goes to move to grandma's house, which is not far, so it's not like she doesn't see her parents. She just lives with her grandmother after she's 5. So when she meets Ian and they go home, it's her grandmother's house when I say they go home.
Okay.
Now, one time when Myra is 8, she gets knocked down by a boy and it scratches her cheek a little. Her dad, giving her some stellar life advice, eye roll, would tell her that she'd better go stand up for herself or he would whip her himself with his leather strap.
So I feel like it's kind of the times. And Jason has a story like that where some kids were bullying him and chased him home. And he went running in the door. And his dad told him to get out there and deal with his bully, or else he was going to deal with him himself. So
I think that's real scary.
it is. And I think I baby my children way too much because I'd go out there and whoop some ass.
Well, I can't, and I guess it also shows my age of I can't imagine telling a little girl who's 8 that comes home that got shoved down by a boy to go try to whoop his ass or stand up for yourself, do whatever. Like it's just, and even not knowing. I think of Jumanji because when that feller sends that boy back out, he just gets a bloody nose and beat up, and there were more than one kid. So it's just like, how do you blindly send a child to go instigate a fight when it could be very much there's a huge size difference, or it's a gang of bullies, or maybe he's got a knife.
Yeah. It's not fair. It's not right.
But that's what he tells her at 8, that she better go deal with it herself or he's going to whip her worse. So she goes out, finds the boy, knocks him down, and punches him several times. And I feel like she gets a real rise out of that because not only is her pa super proud, but she's kind of proud of herself because she didn't take that lick. She gave it to him, walloped him real good, and maybe that changed his life path. So I guess good for him. But it's going to be examined because it's like, mind you, they examine things with under a real magnifying glass there after all the things later in life are done and say that this is probably the point where she got a thrill out of harming someone else. You know?
So this starts her head injury, basically.
That proudness from her father that she was seeking, and you figure she wasn't living with him, so any attention and pride that he provided to her because she hurt another individual is something that was reinforced as a youth, and typically not good if you get the fuzzy happiness from hurting someone.
Yeah, it's usually frowned upon.
But she would record in her diary her first victory.
That's sick.
Now, Ian would come from a similar circumstance. Now, his mom never married, and she would claim that Ian's dad died 3 months before he was born. We'll never know if that was true. But his mom would give him up to a local family that already had 4 kids, and it was hard for her to be a single mom in the 30s, 40s. So it was next impossible for her to keep him and be able to work and do all the things, so she gave him to a local family. Now, he would still see his mother throughout his childhood. He just lived with a neighborhood family. But he would be a troubled youngin', burning a cat alive at the age of 10, stoning a couple's small dog in the neighborhood, and cutting off random rabbits' heads.
Ew.
When he gets into his teens, he would go before the courts twice for breaking into houses. By 15, he starts working and quits schooling altogether. His first girlfriend, he pulls a knife on because she wanted to dance with another boy. So he goes back to court because you can't just pull your knife on people.
What? Now you tell me.
So he's sent to live with his mother on probation just before he's 17. She had gone and gotten married, and her husband was a fruit picker and had just and would get Ian a job there.
Sorry.
But he would get caught stealing and be sent to prison for 3 months before going to a borstal for 2 years of training, which is basically like one of those juvenile homes.
Oh. I was about to ask, what the hell is that?
It's just a fancy way of calling a juvenile detention center. I had to look it up, I'm not gonna lie, because just like in England and all that, they'll call a stroller a pram. I knew that one, so when they reference a pram later on, I got that, but their other words are just strange.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, he'll go to that juvenile detention center to try to straighten out his wobbly life choices thus far. But then he's found drunk off of booze that he brewed up on his own in his little room there. So they send him to a more strict place since he needs extra discipline. He would be let out in November of 57 and go to work at a brewery, which I scratched my head at a bit because if he's already brewing his own stuff in his room, why do you send him to go to work? Or does he have some pretty good skills?
That's a good question.
But I was like, I would think that a youngin' who's dabbling in the alcohol, you don't send him to work at a brewery.
No, it seems like sending a crackhead to go work at a crack farm.
All right. I'm going to use that.
I said it like that for you.
That's like sending a crackhead at a crack farm. What? Do they have those?
I don't know. I don't do
I think those are crack houses, not farms. Anyway, so he'd go work there for a bit, and then while he's working, he would dive into books at the local library, and then get his job at the Millwards place where he meets Myra. So that's your brief history of both of them coming from their little troubled youth things.
All right.
Ian moves in with Myra at her grandmother's house in 63 when on July 12th, they see 16-year-old Pauline Reed, who happened to be on her way to a disco near her home. Now, Myra knew who she was because she had gone to school with her little sister.
Mm-hmm.
Myra would help lure the girl over by saying she needed help finding her lost gloves. Then when she wanders over, they'd beat her over the head and cut her throat with such brutal force that they nearly severed her spinal cord.
Oh my gosh.
Now, I'm not gonna lie, I don't know how often the two of them discussed like the whole torture aspect, the Nazi shit, all the things that it became a thing that they wanted to do together. And I don't know if it just happened that day that they found her. Like, I don't know if they were hunting for somebody or just pieces fell together and they just decided to do what they did. Obviously, she's gonna go missing, but until you have a body, it's just like, I feel like people assume teenagers will run away or like it's a they'll pop up, don't worry kind of thing.
Yeah, I guess I'd always worry. I don't know. I remember Mom reported me missing at 20.
No, not Myra. I'm saying the little girl that they saw is 16. So she'll go missing to everybody else. But I'm telling you, Myra and Ian do that.
Right, I get that. I'm just saying, like...
Oh, I get what you're saying. If you can be reported in your 20s, then a 16-year-old going missing.
Yeah.
But it makes it hard. I'm just going to tell you of the timeline as these kids go missing because bodies aren't found until after they're arrested. So these kids just end up on like all the other missing kids lists of nobody knows what happens to them, and until you have a body, it makes it hard to investigate something they just disappeared, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So bear that in mind when I tell you the events going forward, because I'm telling you it as what Ian and Myra did.
Okay.
Now then, on a day when 7-year-old Tommy Radigan is at Manchester Park, Ian and Myra would approach him, offering to bring him home to make him a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Now, as a hungry 7-year-old boy who's just out running around, sounds like a good idea to him. So he went with them, but felt something wasn't right when they get to her home. They apparently disappear into the kitchen. He can hear them arguing and Ian cussing at Myra. So he just feels super uncomfortable, which he shouldn't have gone home with strangers anyway. So at least he's going to go with his gut. And he decides, you know what? I'm just going to go home. I might be hungry, but I'm not this hungry. So he's going to start to head for the door, and Myra comes out trying to like diving after him. When he starts really picking up the speed, she like trips or falls or whatever, grabs his ankle like while he's in the doorway. He manages to shake loose of that grasp, and once he makes his freedom out the door, he just keeps running and running, and he will be later dubbed the boy who got away.
That's scary.
Dude, it's super scary because if he would have stayed there, who knows what would have happened.
I think we could guess.
Now, roughly 4 months would go by from the 16-year-old that they killed before they look for another victim. I don't know when they had that little boy in the living room, if they were arguing in the kitchen over they shouldn't have brought him back home, or what the scenario was that caused an argument. But 4 months after the first gal they murdered, it's the morning of November 23rd of 63. 12-year-old John Kilbride would be helping pack up stalls at the Ashton Market, which was how a lot of kids his age would earn like just pocket money, game money, gum money, candy, well, just whatever. Just odds and ends by being a help from the people who had the little shops of the market. So he would just hang out there with his friends, like usual, waiting for somebody to need some help. When Myra walks up to John and asks him to help her load up some boxes in her car, John says okay, because again, that's what he's normally there to do. He helps load the boxes, then she offers to bring him home so he doesn't have to walk. And he's like, you know what, that seems like a fine idea. And he sees that Ian's driving, so it's like they seem like a nice couple. So he hops in. Now, by the time 8 p.m. rolls around, John's parents call the police because he hasn't come home and that's not like him. But by that point, poor John has been raped, strangled, and his poor little body dumped like trash.
Oh my gosh.
Now, again, spoiler, Ian and Myra will eventually get caught. So try to focus on that being the silver lining of all this because they are horrible, awful people.
They are awful.
It's going to take 2 years before John's body is recovered.
Oh my gosh.
And they are... So when they start killing people, they're taking them out to the moors, Saddleworth moors in particular, and dumping the bodies in shallow graves. Now, this particular moor is like 2,000 acres of open, hilly grass areas. I don't know if you've seen Wuthering Heights, but it takes place in the moors. So it's just like, I hope you can picture what a moor looks like, yes?
A little bit, yeah.
It's one of those where it's the grassy areas.
Yeah.
There's not trees, it's hilly, it's rocky, it's windy, but it's just one of those... It's just a wide open area. Where how do you find anything in there? You're likely you aren't, and there aren't a lot of people. It's not a high trafficked area. So that's where they're dumping bodies. And that's also why they aren't being found. So these children are just going to end up missing.
So disgusting.
Right. So on June 16th of 64, 12-year-old Keith Bennett would disappear on his way to his grandmother's house. His body will never be recovered.
Oh my gosh.
His mother would spend her entire life trying to find her son, even after the two pieces of shit are eventually arrested, and even say where they dumped his body. They never find him.
Oh, that's so sad.
Police will spend hours, people will volunteer to help, like, wander around, and I don't know if people realize when they volunteer to go look that you're looking for a poor little kid's battered and just their poor little body.
I kind of wouldn't want to find that. Yeah.
Same. So it's just like, I don't know if when everybody's volunteering, they realize what they could be finding. Not to say that he didn't deserve to be brought home, but it's just like the hours of digging.
Kind of got to mentally prepare for that.
Right. How do you prepare for that? But
By the way, it just dawned on me that this is the case that you kind of forewarned me a week ago involved a bunch of children, but I feel absolutely nauseous the idea of what these poor babies were going through.
Dude, when I was reading it, so it's hard because since it does involve children, there's only so much people want to reveal about like the people investigating it. They've already got to endure that side of it, but it's just like the deeper you get into it, it's so disgusting. Why would you do that to these little kids? And they're just so trusting, they assume that they'll be fine. And it's sad to me what they all went through. And I felt so bad for the mother because when everybody volunteers to go out there, there's hours of police trying to comb through to find her boy. His mom would even go out there herself day in and day out with a shovel to try to bring her boy home. But he's just lost forever. And that, I think, is it's so sad.
Yeah.
Like, she'll never be able to lay him to rest.
I have tears in my eyes because it's so absolutely heartbreaking. And I couldn't imagine how she felt.
No. But then I'll bring you to December 26th of 64. They would strike again. This time it was 10-year-old Leslie Ann Downey who would be lured from the fairgrounds by these two perverts.
I really don't like the kid cases. I know you laugh at me for that, but I don't like them.
I felt bad for this one too because it's right after Christmas. And not that your kid going missing, it should be sadder at any point in the year, but it's just like,
It's after such a happy family get together type.
yeah, it should be the happiest point. They should be enjoying winter break, their family, all the fuzzy good things. And I don't understand people who snatch up these little kids. Not that I say murder the adults, but they're such innocent little beings and they're taking out goodness from the world. But they'll lure her from the fairgrounds. They would take her to Myra's grandmother's house where they would sexually assault the little girl and torture her. They would take photographs unveiling their acts and even go as far as to record audio of the little girl's last moments.
Oh, gosh.
And that must have let them relive their sick fantasies and needs because they wouldn't strike again until October the following year. Now, some people will disagree with that and say that they probably were snatching up kids and there's even more that they don't know about.
I would have to agree.
And that could also be possible because I don't feel like people just stop for a year. I think it's one of those, once they're caught, why are they going to admit to anything else?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
But I think of it kind of like with children too, of they'll continue their lie until you've got like, I have actual evidence that you did it. And they're like, oh yeah, I did. But they're not going to fess up. And since it's so hard to find the bodies in the moors, it's just, and then how do you connect them anyway? It's just, again, you'll have some people believe that they have way more victims than what they are aware of.
I agree.
But that'll bring us to October the following year when 17-year-old Edward Evans would go missing. Now, Myra would be sitting in the car while Ian went on the prowl for a victim. He would come back with Edward with the promise of a sexual escapade and introduce him to Myra as his sister. Now, mind you, I did the whole, wait, what?
I just made a face.
Does that mean he's just like, you want to fuck my sister or do you want to fuck my sister with me?
I can tell you if our brother ever came back with somebody and was like, hey, no.
No, that's where it's just like,
that doesn't even make sense.
Well, I'm glad it didn't make sense to you because I was like, what? But they would head back to Myra's grandmother's house and relax over a bottle of wine. Now, they would call up Myra's brother-in-law, David Smith, and ask him to head to the house. Now, David doesn't know Edward's there, and Ian had developed a friendship with him. Myra's not his biggest fan. They don't really have a great relationship. But I'm not 100% sure why they invited David over at all, other than at this point, I think they've done so much of the murdering, they almost wanted to show off or like just bring somebody else in on their antics.
Yeah, they feel invincible because they've been getting away with it.
Right. They're on whatever high of doing the shit that they're doing that they tell him to head on over. Don't come up to the door until we signal with a flashlight when to come in. And it's one of those, yeah, I definitely wouldn't do that. I'd be like, what? But David would get over there, wait for the signal, then go to the door. Ian would open it, and then he would let him in and bring him over to the kitchen and then leave him in the kitchen for a bit. And then David would start hearing a whole lot of screaming and Myra shouting for David to help him. David would run to where the yelling was coming from, only to become a witness to Ian attacking Edward. Edward at this point is lying with his head and shoulders on the couch and his legs on the floor, just screaming. Ian had a hatchet in his hand, holding it above his head, and hit Edward on the left side of his head. David will say it was the absolute worst noise he could have ever heard. And then Ian started throttling him with a bit of electrical cord before strangling him to death with it.
Oh, gosh.
Now, during this process, Ian had hurt his ankle, and David is just like, I gotta get out of here. But if you're wondering why on earth they would let David just panic and leave, it's because David would say that he's going to go get his daughter's stroller to help him move the body to the car since Ian hurt his ankle and moving the body would be a little difficult for him. So he's like, I'm going to go get the stroller, which I also did the whole, what the fuck?
Mm-hmm.
But when he leaves to go home, It's around 3 a.m. And when he gets home, he tells his wife what he witnessed, barfing intermittently during the story because he's so worked up of like, what the fuck?
Yeah, that's a lot.
He's also scared that if they did that to that feller, they could come after him when they realize he's not coming back with the pram. So he arms himself with a screwdriver and a bread knife.
What? Sorry.
So he's a scared Andrea.
Okay.
And
I feel like there's other things to grab.
well, he's scared, so he's gonna sit up the rest of the morning since it's like 3 a.m. when this is all occurring, and he's just gonna wait until the sun comes up so he can run to the payphone to call the police. But he just sits there, like clutching that screwdriver and the bread knife, of thinking that they might come after him. They do not. So as soon as that sun's up enough that he makes his way to the payphone, he calls the police, to which they're like, hold that thought. We're sending somebody to come pick you up and bring you here to make a official statement. They do that. And naturally, when you tell the police about a murder you witness, they tend to look into that shit.
Sometimes.
The police superintendent, I feel like it's probably convincing when you're vomiting while telling the story of the things you saw.
Yeah, I feel like that.
And the noises you hear. You'll never unhear the sound of a hatchet on somebody's skull. Although, I'm not gonna lie, I was confused why he didn't just hatchet him to death, unless it was like, I don't understand the need for throttling him with the extension cord, other than I imagine it was a serious struggle.
It's really disturbing.
It's super disturbing, and I thought it was horrifying that who knows what Myra was doing other than enjoying watching it all take place, and then David just in the doorway, horrified of what the fuck. But he tells the police about it. The police superintendent and a detective head over to Ian and Myra's house to, just see where this all shakes out.
Mm-hmm.
They let the police in. They find Ian laid up on the couch nursing his sore ankle. And they tell them that they're there because they're investigating an act of violence that may have involved guns, which I thought was a weird thing to throw out there. But I don't know if they were trying to make it seem like they're not really there. They don't think something's actually happening, but they just got to check it out to like keep them calm,
Yeah.
And Ian and Myra are like, yeah, nothing violent has ever happened here. That's so strange. But whatever like friendliness they managed to work up when the police are like, well, do you mind if we just look around so we can just head out? And I feel like when you ask that question to somebody, they're kind of forced to be like, yeah, sure, go ahead. That way you can head out. So the police start to look around and they would come to a locked spare bedroom. So they ask Myra to open the door and she's all, oh, yeah, so I keep the keys to that room at my work. Mm-hmm. The officer's like, oh, sure, that makes a whole lot of sense. We can run you up there to grab the keys. That way we can just knock this out. And I feel like at this point, Ian and Myra are darty-eyed and kind of, I feel like Ian knows the jig's up because he tells Myra to just open the door.
Yeah.
To which they do.
Good call.
The police enter to find the body of Edward wrapped in plastic. Now, they had wrapped him in plastic with the intention of David coming back with that pram to help move the body, and
instead he came back with them police.
Yeah, so they're in a little bit of a pickle at this point.
You think?
And I also think not only the ankle, but murdering kiddos is different than full-fledged. Well, I know he's 17, but about the body of an adult. So the police would also find collections of their books, their photographs, all the things that just like, there are some sick, twisted individuals here. Now, Ian would claim that him and Edward went for a row and then things got out of hand and somehow they ended up into an argument. Then it escalated to the point of Edward being dead. And then he panicked with the whole wrapping him in a blanket or the plastic thing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Edward would be arrested on suspicion for murder, which I was like, suspicion? But whatever. Myra isn't arrested since at this point, they don't know that this isn't the first person that has been dead in their company. And especially since Ian's saying it was an accident, even though they've got David saying he watched them kill him. But this is the start of that investigation that everything unravels. So eventually they'll find evidence that Edward was not killed accidentally, like Ian's story. I feel like that's the hatchet mark to the head.
Yeah.
Probably all the throttling marks from the extension cord, which, by the way, I think, was it your case before where that lady beat her kids with an extension cord?
I don't remember because I had to block it out.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'm just disturbed how many people get whipped with extension cords.
It's a bit alarming. I do vaguely remember one of my cases. And I thought it was a father whipping his kids,
No,
but
it's the Mother's Day lady. Anyway, it's disturbing to me because that seems like it'd leave some pretty nasty welts. But they would begin piecing it together, and then they'd also, as they're like processing the scene in which the body was found, they stumble upon photographs of little kids, and then like of just the perverted pictures of the little kids, and obviously you've got their erotic pictures mixed in there too. And then they stumble on an audio of a little girl. So it's just like they're doing the whole, oh, what the fuck did just cracked open here? So it starts a whole mess of things. They also find an old notebook that has the name John Kilbride on it, which is also what aids in that suspicion about them being involved in missing children in the area. Now, police would talk to neighbors who would say that a time or two they would go to the moors with the couple because they really liked hanging out over there, and they would bring people over there. So the police are kind of doing that whole, probably should check that out then, because since they've got missing kids and some of their, like that John Kilbride's notebook being in their house and that body hasn't been recovered, or well, they don't know that there's a body. I would assume that they assume children who go missing, there's a pretty good chance that they're already dead. But they decide that if that's where they like to hang out and spend a lot of their time, we should just go check it out. Now, on top of that, they've got some pictures where Myra is like posing at the moors. So they'll check areas where you can tell that they were at based on where the pictures were taken.
right.
And that's where the first body is recovered of John Kilbride. His mother was able to identify him by his clothing. Now, mind you, some of the children photography that they find in there, they are able to find some where it's enough of the face that they could be identified, but they do not show the parents the pornographic pictures of their children.
I think that's a good call.
Right.
It's bad enough their kid has been murdered.
Right.
They don't need to, that doesn't need to be the final image of their babies.
So the photos they took of Leslie Ann, her mother is able to identify her by those pictures. So just the fact that they know she was in their place, like they took her. But again, they spare her of seeing anything else. So then that would lead to now Anne and Myra are both going to be charged with the murder of Edward, John's, and Leslie Ann's murder. Ian would admit to taking photos of Leslie Ann, but would say that he dropped her off somewhere else and two men picked her up. So he's going to cling to that story and that him and Edward got into a fight and it was all an accident. Unfortunately, the moors are huge, and by December, it made it more difficult to find more bodies because it's winter.
Because of the weather, yeah.
So they decide to go with the three that they have and proceed to a trial there because at least they can get them on what they have now rather than waiting anymore. All the while suspecting with them having committed more than that. So they're going to go on trial in 1966. It's going to be 14 days of testimony. Now, one officer would testify about finding 9 pornographic photographs taken of 10-year-old Leslie with a scarf tied around her mouth that was tucked into Myra's prayer book.
Ew.
So part of the issue would be when you've got a couple, you've got to say, if you're going to charge them both, that you've got, because I feel like you should know.
You got to tie them both into it. Yeah.
You got to tie them both into it. Otherwise, you're going to have one say, oh, he all did it. But of just that they did it together. It wasn't a one or the other, and that they were both doing the things. Also on that, the officer would testify about finding the tapes, that it was 16 minutes of audio where you could hear Ian and you could hear Myra, and Myra would be talking to Leslie in a cruel, callous, brutal manner, all while this little girl cries and pleads for her mother to go home and for them to stop hurting her and not to kill her. 16 minutes of that.
I feel like you're really toying with my emotions today. I don't appreciate it because I can't stop my right eye from watering.
I feel like it's hard enough to imagine what they did to the children, but I can't even imagine the people who had to listen to that audio.
Well, aside from the audio, but also seeing the pictures.
Right. So I imagine 14 days of a trial of that is...
It's a lot.
Yeah. So Ian and Myra would also both testify. Ian would testify for over 8 hours, where again he would play the story of admitting to hitting Edward with the axe and the fight turning to strangulation and still trying to play that whole everything else is just so we didn't do it. Myra would testify for about 6 hours, and she would claim the pictures taken at the moors she didn't realize were near the graves of any victims. But the most powerful piece of evidence, other than, mind you, Edward's body being in their home, was that 16-minute audio tape, because it had Ian and Myra, and you could tell they were doing that together. It wasn't a Myra's innocent or Ian's innocent. They both were sick and fucking twisted, and I'm kind of glad a small sliver.
Yeah, as hard as it was to have that audio, they wouldn't have been able to tie her in.
Right. Now, Leslie Ann's dad would say, to know that your daughter was lost, alone, and murdered, and then actually her death was recorded, the grief can never, ever be etched from your mind. And I would hope they didn't hear the audio, but I feel like if they sat in there in court, they had to hear their daughter's last 16 minutes, and that is so heart-crushing. I can't even imagine. I don't know how they move on from that. But it was, again, the most powerful piece of evidence they would have. It would take the jury just 2 hours to find them guilty.
You better tell me they got life without parole or the death penalty. Otherwise, I'm not talking to you later today. And I realize you have off of work today, and I will not speak to you.
So the death penalty had been abolished 6 months before the trial started, because I too did the whole, if this isn't a perfect example of these people needed to be put down in the most brutal way possible, they don't deserve to breathe one more breath. I don't care if they're ever sorry. No. It just, they deserve the death penalty without a shadow of a doubt. This is a perfect example of why it should be a thing.
So,
But
I need to know.
they were found guilty. They can't be put to death. They also aren't allowed to do life without parole.
Oh my God.
So they would be sentenced to life, but they would really have a sentence of they're up for parole in the 80s, which I also did a whole, well, that's like pretty much a prime for the 80s are fucking stupid anyway. Now, all during this, the police would still continue to try to recover bodies and connect them to other missing children cases, because again, that's where I tell you a lot of people are of the mind that that year where kids are still going missing, that just because they're not going to admit to all their victims doesn't mean they're not out there.
Yeah.
But so even now, they're continuing. You'll have people who will still go out there to see if they can find anything, because it's just, you have some victims who are never brought home.
Those poor parents.
Now, Ian and Myra would write to each other for a good bit while they're in jail. I don't feel like they should have been allowed to write to each other, but I guess after they're found guilty, there's only so much that they can do by writing to each other.
It doesn't matter.
I guess at some point, Myra would do like a whole, you know what? It's one thing to be all like, we write love letters to each other, but then if I can convince everybody it was all him and I was just scared, I can get my freedom. So Myra would start doing just that and try convincing everyone that it was all Ian's idea, and she was coerced out of fear of him. Her attorney would say she's a good woman and try to present her case for parole.
Ask her attorney, would he let her babysit?
Well, Ian would get irritated at her attempts to paint him as the one who did it all, writing a letter to a reporter. Now, mind you, there are people who write to him, and Ian will say that some of the parents also wrote to him, like the one lady who just wants to bring her boy home. But he would say he didn't have it in him to open those letters. I feel like they should have forced them open and read them to him.
Yeah.
One reporter he would write back to, and they would have like a weird relationship, because you had the police also doing the whole, if somebody can get him to tell what has happened or name anybody, that like they would almost encourage it. So when he gets wind of Myra trying to say that it was all Ian and she's just the innocent victim too, Ian would get irritated at her attempts to paint him as the one who did it all, writing a letter to a reporter saying, Hindley has crafted a Victorian melodrama in which she portrays herself as being forced to murder serially. We both habitually carried revolvers and went to target practice on the moors. If I was mistreating her, she could have shot me dead at any time. For 30 years, she said she was acting out of love for me. Now she maintains she killed because she hated me. A completely irrational hypothesis. In character, she essentially is a chameleon, adapting whatever camouflage will suit and voicing whatever she believes the individual wishes to hear. She can kill, both in cruel, cold blood or in a rage. Which I'm not gonna lie, I kind of agree.
I do too.
But no one believed her anyway. Again, that 16-minute audio of she didn't sound like she wasn't trying to participate, and she had ample opportunity to turn him in. So he would eventually stop writing to her ass, and Ian would not apply for parole. And when that reporter would ask him why, he would write him back just saying, it's a fake attempt at freedom. They aren't going to actually let him out, regardless of if they'll claim he's eligible for parole now, that they're never going to let him out. And I kind of did the whole, yeah, because you shouldn't be out. Neither should the other Looney Tune.
Yeah.
So he said that what was the point in going through the motions? It's just a time wasting activity that he's not going to partake in. So I was like, fantastic, glad to hear it. Now, in 1986, I guess Ian would have enough out time that he would eventually admit to murdering 16-year-old Pauline Reed, 12-year-old Keith Bennett, 12-year-old John Kilbride, 12-year-old Leslie Ann Downey, and 17-year-old Edward Evans. Nearly 20 years it would take him before admitting to that.
At least he admitted. Is that him, though? It taking admission to try to get parole?
I don't. Well, he never went through the effort to, like, he wouldn't show up to any hearings. Like, he just flat. I think at some point, the letters coming from the family, having just time to sit there and reflect. I realize I do say that he should have deserved the death penalty, and I stand by it. But I feel like there's also a certain level of just having to sit there and watch your life dwindle for 20 years that I would hope you have to have some sort of moment of, yeah, I kind of shouldn't have done that, maybe, or maybe I can try to make something right. But they'll actually bring him out to Saddlemore to try to help locate Keith Bennett's body, but they're unsuccessful even after him bringing them to where he thinks he is. But I would feel like after 20 years, I get the moors are only going to change so much, but you've got like any mud that's going to go over top of stuff, things that are like, it's changed in some way, and he might not even be where he thinks he is, you know?
Yeah.
But they would not find Keith Bennett's body. They would locate Pauline Reed's body. She was buried in a shallow grave, still wearing her pink and gold party dress that she had seen last in. Now, Keith's mom is the one that went out there originally with a shovel the second she heard that's where they were dumping bodies. Unfortunately, she's going to die in 2012, still unable to find her boy and lay him to rest, which I thought was also heartbreaking. She'll never...
There's never any closure.
Yeah.
Her life was unfairly stripped. I realize her child was killed, but her life was also ended too. Because I don't know how you can move on.
I don't see how you could either, because it's just one of those, he's out there somewhere.
Even with the closure of finding his body, I don't understand how you move on.
I don't know. But the only thing I can say is you can't, because now Keith has another brother. His name's Alan. And other than I would say it's contagious, that constant hunt, because Alan actually runs a website that tries to keep volunteers coming to help look for the bodies of they're going to be named the Moore murderers. But it's just like, if this is where they would dump bodies, like let's help bring these victims home. I mean, he also wants to bring his brother home, but it's just like, that's still a process that people are trying to find the other victims. Now, Ian would eventually die in a psychiatric facility at the age of 79. Now, he was moved to a mental hospital after he went on a hunger strike in 1999 when his weight dropped down to 110. Now, he's a 6-foot-tall man, so he was real teeny tiny. They would have to force feed him through a nasal tube, and he would get real upset about that because he said that he should be allowed to die whenever he wanted to, and they shouldn't be forced to, or like they shouldn't force him to keep living. But they would keep him alive until 2017, which I thought was also a hilariousness of, he's fed through his nose.
Yeah, that's pretty gross.
Well, because then it was like one of those, now where I very much would have liked him to be like, die by firing squad, the two of them. It's kind of an interesting turn of events of he sat in jail for a good long while, wanted to die, but then they squeezed out almost another 20 years out of him.
Yeah.
Up his nose. So it's just like, I guess, in a weird way, drag that one out. Myra dies in 2002. I am happy to say that neither one of them ever have a breath of freedom. Sad to say that no, they don't admit to anybody else. So other than speculation of any of the kids that went missing around the time that when they met each other to when they got arrested, that chunk. They can only speculate.
Yeah.
And on a random ass note, it was weird because any of the articles I read in the newspaper, they kept calling Myra a peroxide
What?
blonde
Oh.
in the papers. And I laughed every time I came across it because it was like, is that supposed to be a burn? And then it made me think of that one case you did where they described the lady as rat faced. I was like, evidently in the UK, being like the peroxide blonde. Like, is any of this necessary? Or it's like, I mean, I don't like them either, but I couldn't help but laugh out loud over.
Not to make anybody squirrely, but I feel like those bleach blondes and the peroxide blondes, they don't have the natural blonde look. It gives you a different kind of visual of what their hair looks like. Does that make sense? Because if she was just a natural blonde, I don't know. I feel like that was a jab.
If you want to pull up the email, there are pictures of.
No, I don't want to see any of that. I will if you're making me, but.
No, it's the pictures of Myra and Ian.
Oh.
There's pictures of people like helping dig up the moors. And then I mean, no evidence pictures.
Those poor babies.
But the faces of.
She looks like she's a bitch. And he looks kind of like.
I thought he looked like one of the fellers from the Peaky Blinders.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know.
But
he looks weird.
I think it's disgusting that them pretending to be like a happy couple to lure children. I don't understand. I don't understand at all. And again, other than having that small bit of happiness that they were stupid enough to make an audio recording, otherwise that very well could have been like a Myra kept doing her thing.
Yeah.
And fuck, it's a good thing he hurt his ankle actually, because if he was able to get rid of Edward's body and it didn't look like there was a scene that it's possible they would have kept going, because I don't think they would have stopped anytime soon. So I'm just grateful they're fucking stupid and managed to fuck up because they wanted to show off in front of someone.
Wow.
Yeah.
That was a very disturbing case.
Yeah, it fucked with my emotions, the 16-minute audio. I know I had done with the Toolbox Killers, they had done an audio of just, it really makes me sick to my core of, I know they have to submit evidence, but it's just like, even to be on the jury, I don't know how you can listen to that.
No.
It's one thing to kind of detach yourself, read all the facts and things, but 16 minutes is a very long time to listen to a little girl crying and pleading and people talking shit to her. And hearing her scream and cry and ask for her mom and she just wants to go home. 16 minutes of that? I don't know how you don't lose your shit as a juror.
I don't know.
And then that's, even as a parent, I don't think I could listen to it. Like a parent, a friend, I don't think I could listen to anybody that I knew, let alone, I mean, not saying I could listen to somebody I didn't know, but I know I would not want to hear the last 16 minutes of somebody I loved being tortured and murdered.
Yeah.
I know I would have a snap of, you want to talk about temporary insanity? And then I would like chew through somebody's throat because you can't have,
you can have a pen. That pen would go right in the side of somebody's neck.
I don't care what it was. It would be like such a level of like caveman murder style, like rip the leg off the chair and beat him with it to death, like level of psychotic rage breakthrough there, because I don't know. Again, I don't know how you. I don't know.
No, I have no idea. That's really disgusting what they did, and I feel so sorry. I know nowadays they'll tell the parents, we're gonna this coming up.
Yeah, you might not want to.
Any of the parents might want to step out. Let's say it was my child that was murdered, but it's not the audio of my child. I still wouldn't want to hear that because I can imagine.
I would imagine
what my kid.
Yeah, I would imagine they had to have done that, but
I would hope.
Still, as the parent, knowing there is 16 minutes of what your kid endured, it's just I can't, like, disgusting doesn't describe it, but I'm just real sad that all the people who don't know where their child, like this case aside, all the children that are missing and no one gets closure on, it's just disgusting.
It's really sad.
And I don't believe that there should be an abolishment in any corners of the world that the death penalty is abolished.
So,
I mean, use it as sparingly as you want to, but this was a case that I was just like, and that's the example of fucking put the needle in their arm, lynch them, chop their head off guillotine style, whatever you gotta do, put it down.
So you heard me that one morning because we were on the phone and I was pulling the trash cans to the curb.
Oh, you're panicked when you thought your boy was missing?
When my 8-year-old was supposed to be standing by the front porch waiting for his bus. And mind you, where the front porch is, the driveway is perpendicular to that. So I have to walk just like 40 feet to where the trash cans were.
Yeah, he wasn't out of sight for very long.
40 feet. And he would have to walk like 75 feet to the bus. So there's no way that the bus could have pulled up and me not seen it. And we live near a railroad track. So the bus also has to stop right at the driveway right before the tracks. So there's no way that he can get on the bus without me seeing, right?
Mhm.
And I grabbed the trash can and I was taking it to the curb. And then I glanced over and I didn't see my 8-year-old. And I was on the phone with you and you heard me panic because there was no way the bus came. I turned my back for less than 60 seconds and he was gone.
It was also all of our studies of it can happen in what was your statistic there? 8 seconds?
It's 10 seconds.
Whatever.
But like I turned my back and then he was gone. And you heard me start to panic.
Mhm.
And I was yelling for him, looking for him. It's the front yard. There's only so many places he could go. And then he had gone in the house. I forget what he went to go grab, but I couldn't imagine being one of those parents where you never even.
Well, living in that state,
Yeah.
I don't see how it doesn't eat you alive. It's got to, because there's a constant not knowing, and then I can't even imagine knowing an area and then only getting that far.
It's very disturbing. Well, good job, because I will definitely think about this case for probably the rest of my life. I feel like, not to say all of our cases aren't tragic in some way, shape, or form, but some of them kind of stick with you.
Yeah.
Like how your toolbox killer. We all know that you have a leaky brain hole. So for you to specifically remember.
Yeah, there's a few that like impact me. I think the toolbox one is because there's also an audio of that one, and the fact that the feller stuck a screwdriver in her head and she didn't die, and then he shoved it in the other ear was fucking disturbing. Also the rabbit teeth being plucked out with pliers. That one. I mean, it just, there are some things that are just like so over the top of despicable.
Unnecessary.
It's just, I don't even understand as how you do that to another person for what? Like, it's not out of anger, it's not out of survival, it's out of just a sick. I don't even. There's no excuse to it. But I think it's even more disgusting when you change those victims from adults to children. And I do think that if it's a child crime, there should be the death penalty in every situation.
I agree.
You took an innocent little person and you did whatever sickness you did to them, you need to die.
See, that's where I feel like I could flip the switch, I could pull the trigger, I could, you name it, I could probably, without...
These two for sure. I could have been in the front row as they drew their last breath and not batted a tear.
Yep, nope. And I would not have a guilty conscience on that one at all.
I would have slept the best sleep ever. The other side of that would be like, they had an opportunity to help recover victims and bring peace, and they still opted not to do that. And why? You know you're not getting out. You have an opportunity to still make a good choice in your life, and you still don't. And I guess by putting them to death early removes that as an opportunity. But even however long they were in jail for, I mean, other than he tried, but he waited so long that it was like, this is an impossible task.
I get it. I completely get it.
That's all I got.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of Homicide Hobbies. If we made you laugh, if we made you cry, or if we mind-fucked you for the day, then we thank you for listening. Please write a review on whatever you're listening to us on. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your coworkers. We're freaking awesome. And join us next week for another episode of Homicide Hobbies. I'm Andy.
And I'm Claire.
That's all we've got.